Hello and welcome to another edition of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. I am your host, Melissa Howes-Whitecross, and I am very excited to have two of South Africa's top raptor biologists with me this evening. A big welcome to all of our viewers tuning in through Zoom, Facebook Live, and for the very first time tonight, the virtual African Bird Fair platform. As always, you can communicate with us through the Zoom chat room and ask your questions to the speakers throughout the webinar using the Q&A box in Zoom or the comment feeds on Facebook and the Virtual African Bird Fair platform. Our speakers will answer these questions at the end of the webinar, so stay tuned till the end. Now, we are really excited for all the preparations for the first ever Virtual African Bird Fair that are well underway. And I'm sure many of you will have seen the exciting promotional material that has been pouring across our various social media feeds, highlighting the showcase event. If you've not yet registered, it is free to attend the fair. Please follow the link in the chat feeds and the Facebook comment feeds and make sure that you book your spot at the Virtual African Bird Fair. We have a fantastic schedule of speakers lined up for you, and you can also buy an entrance ticket to the plenary conservation fundraising lecture by Peter Harrison, MBE, world seabird expert and renowned illustrator, author, artist, and public speaker. I had the privilege of helping Peter record his talk this last week, and I can honestly say that this is the best natural history lecture I have ever seen. Do not miss this lecture. It is a mere 50 Rand to attend. The money goes towards our seabird conservation work, and I really do recommend that everybody book out 5 p.m. on Saturday, the 5th of September, and join us for Peter's incredible talk on ocean nomads, the albatrosses of the Southern Ocean. Don't forget, you can use the hashtag Conservation Conversations if you'd like to engage with us on social media. And if you missed out on any of our previous webinars, you can watch the recordings on the BirdLife South Africa YouTube channel or listen to them on our new podcast platform available on all major podcast streaming services. With over 20 webinars under our belt, we've been grateful to all of the viewers who've donated towards the production of these talks. You can support us by donating through the Cricket Donations platform. You simply have to scan the QR code or visit the Conservation Conversations website to find the link to the donations platform. It's a new month and a new media giveaway, so be sure to join us by logging onto the Conservation Conversations website and clicking the enter button to stand a chance to win these incredible publications by Jacana Media. Some of you may have seen the tome that is the Roberts 7th edition. Everything you need to know about Southern Africa's birds is in this book. And you can also win Warriors, Dilettantes, and Businessman by famous ornithologist Richard Dean. If you've ever wanted to explore a Big Five area on 2 wheels and get to see the Bushveld birds from your bicycle, join me and the BirdLife team for our annual cycle in the Bushveld, this year taking place at Abelana Game Reserve from 5 to 8 November. Space is limited, so be sure to sign up soon. We will ensure that all corona protocols are strictly enforced and that we enforce our social distancing, but it is definitely going to be a lot of fun, and it is a really unique experience getting to bird and bike through the African Bushveld. For more information, you can contact Heryl Naik, and her email is on the screen. Now, joining me tonight are the BirdLife Species Guardians for the regionally critically endangered Taita Falcon. Dr. Andrew Jenkins first uncovered the South African Taita population in the mid-1980s while surveying his other great love, the peregrine falcon. Andrew is an incredible wildlife photographer, and I'm sure those of you who have seen his cover on the recent edition of African BirdLife magazine will agree. Andrew works as a consulting specialist, striving to mitigate the harmful impacts of industrial development on Africa's birds. He is also affiliated as an academic with the Fitzpatrick Institute of African Ornithology at the University of Cape Town. And joining Andrew this evening is Anthony van Zyl, an equally enthusiastic raptor biologist who spent much of his early years studying the biology of the rock kestrels, a field in which he holds a master's degree from the Fitzstitute. Anthony worked as the curator of birds for the Ditsong Museum of Natural History before he changed tack to pursue his passion for computers and software design in the oil and gas industry, while still maintaining his ornithological passions whenever possible. I've had the privilege of joining Anthony and Andrew on last year's Taita Falcon survey of the Blyde River Canyon, and I can honestly say that you are all in for a serious treat tonight. Thank you both so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to tonight's conservation conversation. Anthony and Andrew, over to you. Please share your screen and let's hear all about the amazing Taita Falcon.
Thank you for that great introduction. So Andrew and I, it's a great privilege for us to be able to talk to you tonight about one of our passions, the Taita Falcon. So this talk is going to be about the conservation status of the Taita Falcon, and we've called it cryptic or critical. And the reason why we've called it this is because this is a small little falcon that's really difficult to see. I mean, we've heard many people actually haven't seen this bird. So one idea is that it's cryptic, or the other idea is that it's really rare. So that's one of the things that we're going to explore tonight. So as Melissa mentioned, this particular project is part of the Species Guardian program, which is part of the BirdLife International's Preventing Extinctions program. And there's a lot of people involved in it's basically run by the Taita team. So Andrew and I are just two members of that team, and some of the key people are also listed on this particular slide. Okay, so the Taita Falcon, just to talk a little bit about this bird, it's a small little falcon, roughly the size of a big pigeon. It lives on cliffs exclusively, and it's a specialized little falcon, very fast flying, and catches the food that it eats, small birds, in the air. It has quite a wide distribution, but surprisingly is very thinly spread across that distribution, only found in small pockets. And it co-occurs with two other larger falcon species, the peregrine and lanner falcon. And it's a poorly known of our falcons. So most of the data is historic data coming from Zimbabwe, mainly collected by Ron Hartley. And then over the years, we've built up a data set for our own population here in South Africa. So here you can see why Andrew and I and the rest of the team are so enthusiastic about this little bird. It's certainly, for me, one of our prettiest little falcons that we have. So if we have a look at the global status of this bird, it's listed by the IUCN as vulnerable. And vulnerable means that its population status is such that if it's not actually given some attention, it could become endangered. So the global population estimate published by BirdLife in 2004 is that there's less than 500 pairs in its distribution range. And in actual fact, we only know of less than 50 nest sites. So you'll see the distribution on this map. It has got a quite wide distribution, all the way from South Africa in the south, all the way up to southern Ethiopia in the north, across the much of East Africa. So if we actually go and have a look at some of the specific known populations that we have for this bird, you'll see that these are from the published records. You'll see that there's a published record from Uganda back in 1989. There's some verified pairs and possibly more from Kenya from as far back as 1998. In Tanzania, there's at least one pair that's been reported. In Zambia and Malawi, a single pair or maybe more. In northern Mozambique, some of our most recent sightings, at least 3 pairs. And in Zimbabwe, where we have the bulk of the Taita Falcon population, there's been 15 pairs recorded. And then, of course, here in South Africa, in this particular study, but depending on the year, we've ranged between 7 and 11 pairs. So something that is interesting for me about this distribution is that it ties in with the title of our presentation. And that's basically that it has the raptor community and bird conservation community divided into 2 camps. You get those that say, well, it's a very small little bird, it's found on cliffs, it's got a wide distribution over Africa, there's many unexplored cliffs in that range, and therefore this bird is largely overlooked. So it's much more common than what we think. And then there's the other camp that believe, well, in that range, lots of birders are traveling around through East Africa. Where we found it, we've only found a few pairs, and we really don't know what's going on with this bird, and it's actually, in fact, really rare and on its way to extinction. So I'm hoping that maybe at the end of this presentation, you will be deciding which camp you would like to sit in. So the aim of this study is to ensure the survival of the Taita falcon. And this is in line with BirdLife's mandate to conserve birds and to conserve the ecosystem, especially in the face of the 6th mass extinction event that is underway at the moment. So our goals is to clarify the conservation status of the Taita falcon, and then to identify and then mitigate the significant threats to their population. So these goals are very easily translated into 3 simple objectives that we have in our study that I hope is going to translate into being able to conserve this species. So the first is to monitor territory occupancy and breeding success in the South African study area, so over the long term. The second is to examine the influence of habitat and competition where these birds are found in South Africa and in the rest of their range. And then lastly is to locate and monitor the other Taita falcon populations so that we can really get a good grip of how many Taita falcons there actually are out there. So if we look at the Taita falcon in South Africa, so this bird is only found up in the northeast part of the country in the Mpumalanga, Limpopo escarpment region. And it was first observed back in 1985 by Rushworth and Milstein, but actually only documented in 1991. And this particular black and white picture that you can see in the background was one of the very first Taita falcon pictures taken on the escarpment, where they were discovered at an old peregrine nest site. So a second pair was found in the Stradom Tunnel back in around 1995. And this is the pair that a lot of the birders in South Africa are aware of, and many of people have added Taita falcon to their bird list at the tunnel. So talking about our study area then, so it extends from Berkslux potholes down in the south, all the way up to the Stradom Tunnel in the north, and then along the Olifants River from the Stradom Tunnel all the way towards Penge. So this just gives you an idea of some of the areas of our study area. So you would have just have seen the Blyde River Canyon with its Blyde River running at the bottom and the big dam. And then this picture shows us typical cliffs along the escarpment. And then lastly, here is an aerial shot of the Olifants River, which has carved its way through the escarpment, creating cliffs that Taita falcons can use. So we've taken 2 approaches to finding Taita falcons in this region in our study. So the first is that we've run 2 major surveys where we put in a massive effort to have a look for raptors and other cliff nesting birds throughout the area, throughout the study area. And we've done 2 of these surveys so far, a combined 2006-2008 survey, and then one in 2014. And the way that these surveys are carried out is they are up to 2 weeks long. We have a whole group of people that come up to the escarpment. They break up in teams of 2 and 3. And then they are positioned out at any place along the cliff that would give them a view in the early breeding season, say around July to October, to look for raptors and other cliff nesting birds. So they spend 6 to 12 hours on the cliff, and at these surveys we typically have accumulated over 160 person days of effort looking for raptors. We've covered over 60 kilometers of the escarpment and over 100 different sections of cliff. So as you saw from the previous slide, some of the areas can be really difficult to get to. And for that, we have used helicopters to actually ferry observers to specific observation points. So our interest is obviously in the Taita Falcon, but we take this opportunity to actually record all cliff nesting birds on the escarpment so that we can build up a really good picture of the community there. So we look out for falcons, eagles, buzzards, storks, and ravens. So you can see from these surveys, this shows you all of the escarpment observation points in our study area. So you can see that we actually have had very good coverage of those points. So here's a typical example of somebody sitting at an observation point where they'd sit for up to the whole day looking out for raptors that are flying up and down the cliffs. And then here's a list of nest sites or territories of all of the birds that we found in the study area. Also a fair number of dots. So to summarize the results of our surveys, so here are the different cliff nesting species that we've recorded: Varro's eagle, jackal buzzard, rock kestrel, the big falcons, black stork, and white-necked raven. So we've accumulated over 120 different nest sites or territories of these 8 species. And you'll see there that we've found 11 different pairs of Taita falcons. So the most common raptor on the escarpment is the rock kestrel, yay. 48 pairs, and you see nesting about 1.6 k's apart, and some of them even within 100 meters of each other. The rarest cliff nesting bird on the escarpment is the black stork. And then of our particular interest is the falcons and the Taita falcon. And you'll see that the Lana falcon is the most numerous falcon on the escarpment, with peregrine and Taita falcon quite far behind. So when we're not doing one of those big surveys, we then have been monitoring the various Taita falcon territories that we know of from 2006 till last year. So these monitoring exercises are slightly smaller than the big surveys. 7 to 10 days are spent there each year of up to 6 observers. Once again, we sit at the various known territories, just looking for birds. And this time we look late in the season, because the idea is that we want to actually record breeding success. So by going late in the season, it gives us the opportunity to see either big chicks on the nest or chicks that have already fledged. We spend up to 12 hours in each of the territories just to make sure that we have recorded all the information that we need. And once again, for those difficult to get to sites, we do make use of helicopter assistance again. So let's have a look at some of the information from our monitoring. The very first thing we want to have a look at is territory occupancy. So here I'm showing you a table of the 11 territories that we've found for the years from 2006 through to 2019. And what we need to see there is that the green blocks are where we found the pairs were actually in their territories. Orange blocks are where there was only a single bird and red blocks were where we didn't find any birds in that particular season. And for some of the pairs, you'll see that we filled in some letters there because they had been taken over by one of the other big falcons. So of the 11 territories that we found over the years, they've been reduced to 7 since 2010, when we started the serious nest monitoring. And you'll see that 2 of them have been lost to peregrine falcon and 1 of them lost to lanner falcon. The second table that I'm just showing you here is showing the breeding success. So this table is the same for our 11 territories, and here it shows you when they've bred, there's a green block, and the number of chicks that we recorded in December is written in the block. So there's several interesting things that come out for me in this table. So you'll see that the first thing is that some of the birds are breeding reasonably regularly. Some of them breed now and again, and some of the territories don't actually produce chicks at all through the full period that we've been watching those territories. And you'll also be interested to see that of our population of 11 different territories, 3 territories produce about 80% of all of the chicks for the population. And you can see that these 3 have produced a whole number, these 2 particularly, a whole number of chicks through the different years. They're very successful. So this brings us to the point of thinking about their conservation. And that brought us to the question of, well, what do Taita falcons need? So it's been widely published in the literature that 2 key requirements for all birds is that they need food and they need nest sites. So these 2 items are a function of the general environmental conditions. So we've taken our data that we've collected on the Taita falcons on the escarpment and the birds in that community, and built through the expertise of Robin Collane, our modeler on the Taita falcon team, 2 different models at 2 spatial scales. We've built one model at a fine scale, specifically looking at a whole lot of variables just in their immediate environment. And then we've also built another large scale model to try and have a look at Taita falcons over a larger area. So if we have a look at the fine scale model first, there Robin modeled 14 different habitats specifically related to 14 different variables specifically related to habitat, climate, and in the community. And these models were run for the Taita falcon and for all the other cliff nesting species for which we had enough data. And I'm now going to present the results for 2 of the species, the Taita falcon, which we're talking about today, and then also the lanner falcon. So just remember that the model is all about correlations. So that's why you'll see that we either have positive associations with the various variables, the green arrows and pluses, or negative associations with some of the variables. So for instance, you will see that for the Taita falcon, moving from left to right, it has a negative association with other lanner falcons. So the closer lanner falcon to the Taita falcon, it puts the Taita falcon off. And the same for the distance to another Taita falcon. And then the other negative association is then when woodland has become fragmented. So where there's a positive association with the distribution of Taita falcon nests is where there's intact woodland, where there's hot cliffs, and where there's big cliffs. So if we compare that to the modeling exercise that we did for the lanner falcon, you'll see some similar negative associations, like lanner falcons also have a particular distance that they need to breed away from their conspecific. And you will see that they had a negative association with the habitat, woodland habitat. But they had a positive association with agriculture, the amount of agriculture in the region, as well as large cliffs. So now we've had a look at the models that show us the associations with Taita falcon within the immediate habitat. We then also wanted to have a look at, well, where can we go and look for Taita falcons elsewhere based on the information that we now know that are correlated with Taita falcon distributions. So we took 7 abiotic variables, and these are them over here in this pie chart. They are closely linked with mountainous terrain, for instance, this blue, which is a slope variable, and then also with habitat and climate type variables. So for instance, soil types, solar radiation, etc. We took these results and we ran them and plotted these results in a GIS. And we ran this across South Africa, so we haven't extrapolated this quite across the East African distribution yet, but we ran this across South Africa. And it was interesting because we did the same models for the peregrine and lanner falcon, which then plotted across the whole of South Africa. In this particular case, there was no data came out on the map for the rest of South Africa, so I've only just included the areas where you can see the model plotted where we could expect to see Taita falcons. Obviously, the darkest is the most likely occurrence, and you can see this is in our particular study here because obviously the data is based on that study. But if you have a look at other similar places, you'll see little bits of blue in some of the mountains to the south. Further along the escarpment up to Volkberg, you'll see that there's various areas in the Soutpansberg that are potentially good for Taitas, as well as right up in northern Kruger and along the Limpopo River. So for those of you that are particularly interested in looking for a challenge and putting your name out there as finding another population of Taita falcons in South Africa, this is a good map to base some of your trips on. So having worked in South Africa and looking at our Taita falcons on the escarpment for so many years, we decided that to try and get our teeth into another population, the nucleus of the Taita falcon population across this distribution range is around Victoria Falls and Batoka Gorge. So we had the opportunity to go up there to go and have a look. These Taita falcons were found there in the early 50s. It's considered the prime location for Taita falcons. Many people have seen Taita falcons in the gorge. The population has been surveyed regularly, and there's at least 6 known breeding pairs recorded in the gorge. But data from the mid-2000s, when they were doing surveys then, was suggesting that the numbers in Batoka Gorge were dropping. So this prompted us to actually go and have a look there what was going on. So we went up in 2013 and 2014, and we joined with several of the people in Zimbabwe, including BirdLife Zimbabwe, to do a similar survey to how we do our surveys on the escarpment. So once again, we set out a whole lot of observation points all along the gorge. You can see that we divided the gorge into 3 different areas just because previous studies had been divided up like that as well, into a sort of upper, a mid-section and a lower section. And these blue lines in this particular picture show you the bits of river that were covered. We had fewer observation points in this lower section because there is less cliff along the river there, and some of the sections we did more extensive walking rather than long hours looking at the cliffs there. And you'll see that these are all the cliff nesting bird nest sites that we picked up during our surveys. So if we have a look at the results, so you'll see that similar to a previous table I showed you for the escarpment. So here they've divided it up into the upstream, midstream, and downstream sections of the river. This is just to compare with previous studies. But I'm going to focus our talk here on the full surveyed length of river. So in the 1990s, for the Taita Falcon, you can see there the 6 pairs that I've already mentioned. And unfortunately, during our surveys that we did there, we did not see a single Taita Falcon. So I'm very pleased to hear that they have subsequently been seen in the gorge then, but in our surveys, we didn't find any, thus supporting the idea that the number of Taita Falcons in the gorge has dropped significantly since the 1990s. You'll see that peregrines have more or less stayed the same. And of interest is that the Lanner falcons, not recorded in 1990, we recorded 3 pairs that have moved into the gorge. So Lanner falcons have been slowly increasing, peregrines have remained stable. So for us, the Taita falcons after our surveys had apparently gone. So looking at the findings of our Taita falcon work, so there's no doubt about it, Taita falcons, they are small birds in huge landscapes. They're difficult to find and they are surely overlooked. However, for us, we believe that, well, at least in South Africa, there is very good coverage of birders across the country. Many people go to Blyde River and the rest of the escarpment, the Soutpansberg, Volkberg, etc. And very few sightings of Taita falcon are made. So based on this and based on our experience in the survey populations, we believe that the Taita falcon is extremely rare and susceptible to environmental change. So for us, with the modeling work we've done and so on, the main threats with a serious implication across its range is definitely the degradation and clearing of woodland and forest. And then associated with that can be then the spread of agriculture, and associated with that is the influx of Lanner falcons. So going forward for our study, it's really important for us that we want to continue the long-term monitoring and area-wide surveys in South Africa. For us, it's very intriguing that this bird is found in such small pockets. It's very intriguing that they have been at Batoka Gorge for decades, and now suddenly when we do a survey, the numbers seem to be dropping. So that's something that we want to continue. We acknowledge, though, that there's very little known about this bird. So it is very important that we start up some intensive research work on the breeding biology, foraging ecology, and the genetics of this bird. Considering that here we've got a bird that's spread across a wide distribution range, and they seem to be in such small little population pockets, we often wonder about what the implications are of inbreeding and how it maintains genetic diversity. And then we want to go on and identify more known and modeled hotspots to find more Taita falcons. And lastly, we want to then export everything that we found out in South Africa and our monitoring protocols to the rest of the Taita falcon distribution. So for us, it's a dream if we could have teams then in Zimbabwe, Zambia, Mozambique, Kenya, etc., to actually do regular monitoring and searching for Taita falcon populations in their countries. So this particular area is Nyasa, northern Mozambique. And the most recent Taita falcon surveys have come from this, most recent Taita falcon sightings have come from this area. And this is an area that we're very interested in. You can see that it's typically lots of woodland covered with these inselbergs. And after I've been telling you about how you get these small little pockets of Taita falcon pairs just dotted around, and only a few of them, when you look at this expansive area and all of these inselbergs, you have to wonder to yourself, well, how many Taita falcons are actually distributed across this area? I mean, does each one of these inselbergs have a Taita falcon? So, as I said earlier, this is an effort from a huge number of different people. This is the whole South African Taita falcon team, all of the people that have contributed. And it has obviously been supported financially by a whole lot of different institutions, companies, and people. So we want to say thank you to all of those people today, because, I mean, thanks to them, we've been able to get as far as we have with our knowledge of Taita falcons and our vision of the conservation of these birds. And I hope that this will continue into the future. So a whole lot of pictures of our happy times. Yeah, that's it. Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks, Anthony and Andrew. What a fantastic webinar that was, and really beautiful imagery. So thank you so much for taking us on that journey and teaching us a little bit more about these very elusive birds. Andrew, I hope you're going to be a bit more chatty in the question and answer session. But well, really,
Anthony carried the can very nicely, so I really feel I needed to say.
He certainly did. I'm going to start you guys off with a question from Susan. And she's saying that you mentioned that Taita falcons are bird hunters. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on the kinds of birds that the Taita falcon are going for, please?
I'll leave it talking to you.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a good question. That's one of the things that we still need to get properly to grips with. But in the time that we've spent watching them, we have obviously seen them bringing food into the nest cliff, and we've seen a little bit of hunting. You know, it's a small predator, so it takes proportionately small prey. It's essentially a small bird hunter. We think, or I think, that they are quite have quite a liking for red-billed quelea. It's certainly a species that comes up quite frequently in the prey items that we're able to identify. But things of that sort of size are pretty much staple for taitas. Quelea are obviously very abundant, which makes them good candidates for any bird predator. And as granivores, they are obligate drinkers, which means they have to make flights routinely every day from wherever it is they're foraging to wherever it is that they drink. So granivores are particularly susceptible to predation by falcons that really need their prey to follow predictable flight lines. You know, there is some documented information on the diet of taitas in Zimbabwe. And it's a much wider diversity of species than we've observed in our population. but probably the simple answer to your question in terms of what we know now is anything smaller than an emerald spotted dove, that sort of size. Swifts, obviously, aerial insectivores, reputedly is something that they take a lot. We haven't seen a great deal of it.
Yeah, only a few.
But we've seen them take alpine swift and black swift on the escarpment. We've also seen them take birds like lazy cisticola, we thought we got in one instance. But that's an aspect of the bird's biology that it's important, you know. Anthony presented a slide, what the Taita falcons need, and obviously they need food. And if we're going to understand what limits them and what might expose them to the risk of extinction, we need to know what they eat. And we need to do much more intensive, detailed research on their foraging ecology and their diet. So, yeah, good question. What do they eat?
Absolutely, and any budding PhD students out there who are keen to put in some funding proposals to come and do that, please get in touch with Andrew, Anthony and BirdLife South Africa. It's definitely, the ecology of this bird is sorely lacking in terms of data and information, so it would be great to see that advancing. Now we've got a few questions actually linked to their distribution. Eleanor Mary is asking whether they are only found along Eastern Africa. And George Ledeck has commented that there was no mention of Ethiopia in your talk, but that there apparently has been a record from southern Ethiopia. Would either of you like to comment on that sort of East African range, please?
You're leaving this to me as well.
Yeah.
I think we did mention Ethiopia as being the northern extremity of the bird's distribution. Yeah, there's not much known about the presence of Taitas in Ethiopia beyond one or two isolated records. So, but further south into what we generally refer to as East Africa, it's definitely, you know, the bird is definitely in those areas. Kenya, Tanzania, and our good friend Simon Thomsett, who's you know, one of the great characters and experts on East African raptors in particular. He's the guy who would have any kind of useful knowledge about Taita falcons in Kenya, and Simon's quite confused about what's going on with them there. They seem to be quite unreliable in where they occur. He finds places where he thinks they're breeding, and the next time he goes there, they're gone. So again, it's something that we've experienced in our population as well, that the birds seem to be quite, you know, with studies of birds like lanners and peregrines, the populations of those larger falcon species tend to be very stable. Breeding territories are occupied for, in some instances, you know, looking at fossil record going back to thousands of years. Taita falcons seem to be much more flighty. They're in an area, they seem to be established, and then for some or other reason they disappear. So they are in East Africa. We don't really know to what extent. And whether or not those populations are well established and permanent, or a bit more erratic. Does that cover those aspects?
Thanks, Andrew. We've got a question from George asking with regards to the proposed hydroelectric dam in Batoka Gorge. Now, Andrew, I know you are an avian specialist and you comment a lot on these developments. How do you think this dam is going to affect the area for Taita falcons? Can you offer a bit of insight into that, please?
Well, as you probably know, that dam has been in the pipeline for a very long time, but it's starting to look much more like a reality now than perhaps it has ever in the past. And I'm sort of torn in a way, looking at it in the sense that we've been looking for Taitas there, and either temporarily or permanently. They don't seem to be there right now. So in that context, the dam wouldn't really have much impact on them at all. But given that we know that there was a good population of taitas there, there's no reason to suspect that they won't at some later stage re-establish. If that were to happen, I think the dam would be quite a significant factor. It's difficult to know how they would respond to having open areas of flat water at the foot of cliffs that they might want to occupy. Certainly the cliffs that go underwater with the dam will obviously be lost to them. Overall, you know, Batoka is an incredible place for birds of prey. Even if you don't see taitas there, there's an amazing diversity of raptors, including really important populations of cliff nesting birds. So the impact of the dam on taitas is a little bit complicated at the moment. Overall, it would, you know, I guess it would have to be negative, and it's certainly going to be negative for a whole lot of other species that warrant conservation attention too.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andrew. I see we've got a comment here from Nigel Collar saying that the Ethiopian record that George was referring to was spotted by him and Clay Spottiswoode, and they are actually withdrawing that recent record. There's only a couple of specimen records to accompany that. So thanks for that, Nigel. I'm just adding that comment. We've got a great comment here from last week's webinar panelist, Dr. Warwick Tarberton. And Warwick's asking what the best time of day is to pick up activity of Taita Falcons at the cliffs. And hello, Warwick, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Warwick. Yeah, it depends who you ask. If you ask the late, great Ron Hartley, who did all that good work in Zimbabwe, and the guys who worked with him who are still interested in taitas, they'll tell you you've got to be up before the sun. The birds are extremely crepuscular. The activity happens either very early or very late in the day. Our experience on the escarpment in South Africa is actually they become, if anything, more active a little deeper into the morning as things start to warm up and the granivorous birds start to get on the move. We've seen several times sort of surges in hunting behavior at around sort of 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, all other things being equal, in my experience, falcons are best looked for early in the morning. But the taitas we've watched on the eastern escarpment in South Africa are quite active a bit later in the day.
Yeah, through the morning and then late in the afternoon. But having said that, we've also sat at some cliffs for hours and hours and hours and not seen anything. So, yeah.
Yes, or a wisp of something, as we experienced in December, Anthony.
Yes.
These birds move very quickly. But thanks for that. We've got a question here on Facebook asking how the diet compares, the limited knowledge that we do have on the diet, how it compares with that of Lanner and peregrine falcons. Andrew, I don't know if you'd like to expand a bit on that, the sort of comparing the three diets of the falcons that we have.
Okay, well, I mean, the two extremes are the Lanner and the Taita. So that, you know, Lanners are bigger, sort of rough and ready birds, relatively speaking. They're quite happy to take stuff on or close to the ground. In our area on the escarpment and in many other areas of Africa, they have a propensity to steal the free-range chickens of people in rural settlements, and they can do very well on free-range chicken. But they have quite a diverse diet. It's not that they can't be dynamic hunters. They are impressive flyers, and they hold their own as aerial predators of fast-flying birds. But they're much more adaptable, and they take probably generally bigger prey and more prey on the ground. Taitas at the other end of the spectrum are exclusively aerial. They have a very high wing loading, which means lifting stuff up off the ground is really a non-starter for them. They hunt at very high speeds and they take generally very small birds. So there's probably not that much overlap in diet between taitas and llamas. Peregrines fall a little bit into the middle, but I'm guessing that there's quite a significant overlap in what taitas take and what peregrines take. Certainly where peregrines can have access to red-billed quelea, for example, they'll very happily nosh away at them. Although when they're feeding chicks at a nest, they're probably under pressure to take slightly larger prey than that.
Mm.
Thanks. And a follow-up question to that from Gareth Coombs on Facebook is asking, have you ever noticed them taking bats?
We haven't, no. I've seen peregrines hunting bats a lot, and we haven't seen them hunting bats on the escarpment. That's not to say that they don't. I'd be very surprised if they don't. But yeah, the short answer to your question is we haven't seen it.
We've got a question from Henny Wellman on Facebook as well, and I suppose this is a question on all the birders' lips watching tonight, and that is, what is your advice in terms of the best place to go and see or attempt to see a Taita Falcon?
Ooh, you want to handle that one?
Well, we didn't get into the details of the tunnel pair that everybody knows, but I mean, I'll just mention it now, seeing that you brought it up. So that's been one of the most popular pairs around, and they've been reasonably constant in terms of their occupancy at the tunnel. I mean, I think there was 1 year that we didn't see them, right? 1 or 2. They were down to a single bird at one stage, but then it was back to 2. And then this last season, we actually went there to find a pair of breeding peregrines. So we didn't see taitas at all, and there were baby peregrines flying around on the cliff there. So that sort of, we've noted that down just as it's one of the pairs actually that we've got down that's lost a sight to the peregrines. Let's hope they come back. Maybe it's just a once-off. So I mean, that is, I mean, I suppose that's always been our best place to look for taitas. My only other suggestion is that, I mean, hang around in that whole Blyde escarpment area, etc. And I mean, they are there, so there's a chance that something will fly by and you'll see it. Else, I say, start exploring into some of those other areas we mentioned, and when you find something, then let us know, because we also want to know.
Absolutely. And if someone is lucky enough to see a Taita Falcon, what is the best way for them to report it? And that's a question coming in from Deirdre Claessens on the Virtual African Bird Fair platform.
The best way for you to report it is to email. Probably Melissa is the easiest person to email.
Yep.
You're very welcome to email me or Anthony. We'd be very keen to hear about it. It's not every day that these records come in. I mean, we've been working on this bird for over a decade now. And, you know, over that time, I think people in the sort of birding circles have known that we're doing this work. We don't get inundated with people who've seen taitas here, there, or everywhere. I mean, occasionally we get a sighting that may or may not be
I mean, one bit of advice that I'll please give everybody out there. If you do see a taita and you can, please just try and take a photo, even if it's a cell phone photo through your binoculars. Because, I mean, you would have seen the discussion going on about the confusion between African hobby and taitas. And then there's also rock kestrels that are the same size. And, I mean, the thing is, a photo is always going to help you, even if it's something off in the distance that one can have a look at just to check. Because, I mean, they are rare, and we love to hear, we would love to get lots of reports like that. But we have actually received reports before, and chased some of them here in South Africa, thinking, oh yeah, maybe that's something, and none of them have turned up anything. So we are keen to find more. We'd be very excited, but please just try and get some additional evidence to back your sighting.
Absolutely. And yeah, definitely, if you are using the BirdLife app, you can always log them on the BirdLife app, and that info does come through to us too. But definitely get in touch with Anthony, Andrew, or myself if you do manage to come across a Taita Falcon. We've got another question here from Nicolette Forbes, Chair of BirdLife Port Natal. She's on the Virtual African Bird Fair platform, and she is asking if there's any information in terms of breeding success. So you were able to show some data on the chick production of some of these nest sites, but do we have any indication of how successfully those chicks ultimately fledge from those sites?
So if I'm understanding correctly, once they're fledged, do they recruit back into the population? Or?
Yes, I think that's what Nicolette's referring to.
Yeah, I mean, we're so far away from understanding or having any kind of a grip on that sort of information. You know, we'd have to have marked birds or tracked birds. And at the moment, we're struggling just to find these things. And the environments that we study them in make them, you know, doing hands-on type work, getting to nests and ringing youngsters or catching and marking adults or anything like that we're a long way from being able to do that. So you know, what we're doing at the moment is we're getting a bead on how many young birds are fledged from each nest. The sort of general perception is that in falcon biology, there's a reasonably high juvenile mortality. So one wouldn't expect many of those young birds that we've seen fledged from nests on our escarpment population to actually make it through to being adults. Whether or not they disperse out of our population and recruit into others in, you know, in Zimbabwe would be the closest. It's an awful long way for those little birds to go. So we often sit and wonder what happens to the youngsters that we see being produced. They're just going out into an enormous vacuum with no other type of falcons.
And I mean, we have had pairs there that have, I mean, there's been some pairs that have been single birds for several years, year after, and like we sit and we watch those poor things and we wonder, man, are they going to be able to get a mate? And then we think, well, maybe there's not a lot of extra Taita Falcons flying around here. So yeah, I mean, it basically boils into the fact that we don't know a lot about their general biology at all, and these are all the things that still need to be studied.
Yeah, good question, but I'm afraid we don't have.
Yeah, we don't have any info.
Yeah,
give us a clue and we'll find out.
Yes, no, definitely, and I think something that's really important, and Robin's modelling is certainly alluding to that, is just how important the surrounding habitats around these cliffs are. So certainly the cliffs themselves, obviously very key for these Taita Falcons, but that sort of integral habitat being intact and full of healthy woodland at the base of these cliffs is really proving to be quite an instrumental mechanism for keeping these birds around. And we know our partners in Kruger's Canyons are working very hard to secure a lot of the remaining forest patches around the Blyde River Canyon Nature Reserve. And they actually have just gazetted an expansion to the Blyde River Canyon Nature Reserve, which is out for public comment. So let's hope that that is successful and will continue to secure that important habitat around the cliffs, which provides a lot of prey opportunities and obviously supports these birds surviving long term. We've got a question from Trent referring to whether there are any captive breeding programs either here in South Africa, further afield in Africa, or even the UK, USA. I know we do have a number of Taitas in captivity through falconry, but would either of you like to just elaborate on any breeding programs that you do know about, and whether you think releasing birds out into the wild would even be a mechanism for trying to recover the species?
Yeah, you can talk about that.
Okay. Okay, so there are Taita Falcons in captivity. Going back to when the Peregrine Fund, mainly through Ron Hartley, but also off their own back in the
70s,
80s.
Yeah.
They set about harvesting some young birds from nests in Zambia and Zimbabwe that were taken back to the Peregrine Fund headquarters and set up as inbreeding pens, essentially to determine whether or not they could be bred in captivity. And Ron in Zimbabwe also set up some breeding pairs. I think there may be one pair still left in Zimbabwe. There's several, I don't know how many birds are still in the States, but they're sort of spread quite far and wide now. There's breeders all over the US that have, I mean, I don't know, I'm not talking a lot of birds, but there's a number of breeders that have pairs of Taitas or single birds and breed with them. In South Africa, there's a pair or two with Ben Hoffman in KZN. I think Tim Wagner in Gauteng has one or two pairs. So there are a number of places and a number of pairs in captivity that do breed. I don't think they're as easy to breed as some of the other large falcons, but these guys seem to be managing to do it. Whether or not that is a significant thing for the conservation of this bird, it might be somewhere down the line, and I suppose knowing that we can breed them in captivity is a sort of a fail-safe thing.
That's good to know.
But for us, you know, first and foremost, we need to understand what is going on with this bird in the wild. To spend a lot of time and money and energy on reintroducing captive bred birds into an environment where we don't really understand how the species interacts with the environment, what its resource requirements are, what are the things that might be limiting or threatening the population. We need to understand those things first before we get down to introduction of captive bred birds. That's a long way down the line if we ever get there. But there are birds in captivity, and I guess it's good to know that they're there, given that the number of birds that we know of in the wild is very small.
Absolutely, and I think that's an excellent point, Andrew, that until we understand the broader ecology of the species, breeding in captivity and just releasing birds into this unknown abyss would be probably a misdirection of conservation funds. So trying to unlock some of those ecological questions is definitely a high priority for us in trying to save them. We've got a question from Eleanor Mary asking whether the inaccessibility of the cliffs, which a lot of these birds breed on, and some of these cliffs really are monstrously huge. Does this offer the bird protection from people who may want to try and collect eggs?
We hope so.
Yes, I think most definitely it helps that.
You certainly need to have a lot of hair in your chest to work on some of the big cliffs that they use on the escarpment. You know, it's always difficult to know what goes on in the egg collecting community, if it even exists. I mean, we hear some quite impressive tales about what some of the individuals in the egg collecting community get up to. And if that's anything to go by, nothing is beyond them. But certainly I think Taita Falcons get quite a lot of security from that kind of interference. Certainly in South Africa, where they typically occur. In other areas of Africa, maybe not so much. But the big escarpment cliffs in South Africa are something significant to deal with. So I think I'd like to think they're pretty safe on those cliffs.
Thanks. We've also got a question from Christine Armstrong asking, why are they so cliff dependent? Is it that they're using the thermals We know that they do nest on the cliffs, but what is it about the cliffs that is so key for this raptor?
So that's a good question.
Yeah, it is a good
Yes,
question.
it's an exciting question too.
So I mentioned earlier that they have a very high wing loading, which means that they've got essentially they've got very small wings relative to quite thick set, dumpy build. And that's really useful for them in achieving high speeds for hunting. But it means that powered flight, flapping flight, is quite energy sapping for them. So I think the lady who asked the question referred to the issue of lift and so on, and I think lift is a critical thing for a bird like a Taita Falcon. So living in areas with a lot of topographic relief that generate a lot of orographic lift, updrafts and so on, that's certainly something that they are quite dependent on. And when you sit at cliffs watching these birds, it's quite noticeable that when the wind starts to pick up, they start to get airborne. The cliff is also important, I think, as a vantage point from which to hunt. So they do hunt from the air, particularly when it's windy. But a lot of the hunting that we've seen happens from the cliff. So they sit high up on these cliffs with on the escarpment or in the canyon with a massive outlook. The volume of air that they're able to survey, looking for suitable targets to hunt is enormous. And they can sit there using no energy whatsoever and then drop off these cliffs and achieve enormous speed and take whatever it is they're hunting completely by surprise. So the cliff is important from a hunting point of view, from an energetics point of view, and I guess, as we touched on just now, from a security point of view. Those would be the things that I would sort of would suggest. Anthony?
No, spot on.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thanks for that, Andrew. We showed in the models that there is some negative associations between the presence of Lanner falcons and Taita falcons. So can we elaborate on this a little bit? Do we know if Lanner falcons are preying or killing Taita falcons in the area, and do they prey on the chicks of Taita falcons?
Oh, I hate to have to say this again, but we don't really know. we see interaction, obviously interaction between Taitas and the other two big falcon species is something that we particularly look out for. And Taitas don't like having Lanners around, so when they're in their airspace, they get chased off pretty smartly.
We probably see most interaction with Lanners. But maybe that's because there's more Lanners there, right?
Well, there's lots of Lanners there, yeah. Okay. And I mean, you know, they interact with peregrines too, to the point of, you know, losing their territory or at least their primary nest cliff to a pair of peregrines. It wouldn't surprise me if particularly newly fledged youngsters were taken by the bigger falcon species. I think they tick a lot of the boxes in terms of the types of birds that they might be likely to hunt, either as a competitive thing or as just a straight up feeding thing. But the relationship between Taitas and Lanners, you know, our modeling is all, it's in scientific or statistical parlance, it's correlative. So we know that Taitas, the likelihood of a Taita falcon living on a cliff is lower if there's a Lanner falcon pair nearby. But we don't know if that's because the Lanners are there or because of another environmental parameter that Taitas might not particularly like, and the Lanners do particularly like. So Lanners like more open woodland, they like access to free-range chickens, they like access to areas that have been put to agriculture, and Taitas don't like those things. So when you have a situation where you know, a tract of habitat is modified by agriculture or some other human activity, and let's say hypothetically you lose a Taita Falcon pair and a Lanner Falcon pair moves in. Unless you're watching very closely to see the Lanners push the Taitas out, it could just simply be that the area is no longer tenable for Taitas to live in, and it's suddenly attractive for Lanners to live in. So that's again one of these aspects of the bird's biology that we really need to unlock, the relationship that they have with the other big falcons, and whether or not they are pushed into suboptimal habitats by bigger, more dominant species, or they just have different habitat requirements, and the three species sort of fit together nicely. But when the balance is upset by habitat transformation, it tends to be upset in a way that disadvantages Taitas and advantages Lanners.
I know that for me, when I first started looking at these birds, I mean, for me, competition with the other big falcons, this must surely be a big thing, right? Because this is a small little falcon. You know, these other guys can just bully them out. But I mean, realistically speaking, we don't actually see a lot of interaction between other raptors and the Taitas. I mean,
and when we do, the Taitas are very aggressive, and very fast, and very persistent.
Just chase them off.
So big raptors get shown the door quite comprehensively. But you know, we heard about the situation at the tunnel from Michael Kamaka, the BirdLife, or formerly BirdLife guide, who is very well known for showing people at the tunnel where the Taitas are. And he told us the whole story of what happened there last season. And it was quite a distressing story of the peregrines coming onto the cliff regularly and battling with the Taitas, and those battles getting more frequent and more intense. And eventually the Taitas gave way and the peregrines took over. That's quite a significant thing that happens, and if that happens more regularly, unfortunately, we don't know what happened to those Taitas. They may have gone around the corner and set up shop on a different cliff, but we have in the past checked other cliffs in the area and not found the birds there. So, yeah, we think it's an important factor. We're just not quite sure how it plays out yet.
Absolutely, yeah, and you mentioned Michael. He is still with BirdLife, and he is still one of our community guides. And I do recommend, even if the peregrines have taken over that spot, Michael does know the area quite well, and would definitely take you on an excellent morning out birding and trying to look at some of the other cliffs for Taitas. So
and he can show you the peregrines, Melissa, don't overlook that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, as Andrew loves his peregrines, and they are well worth a look. Really impressive falcons, even if you don't get to see the tunnel Taitas who used to be there. Michael's cell phone number is on the Taita Falcon signboard. If you just stop at the parking lot for the JG Stratum Tunnel Crafts, you'll be able to see the Taita board there, and you can get Michael's number. I see Nicola did share that she'd had a good day out with him seeing Taitas not too long ago. So yeah, definitely worth a day out. Getting back to the way these birds hunt, and I don't know if we do actually have any data here, but perhaps some anecdotal observations. Simon Fogarty is asking if we have any idea of the success rate when these birds are hunting, and if you'd like to elaborate on that.
Well, Anthony, you must chime in here as well, but they can give you the impression of being supremely successful hunters. I mean, they have bouts of hunting where, for whatever reason, everything seems to fall into place, and they start to hunt, and they catch stuff very quickly. I mean, Anthony and I always talk about an experience we had at one of our nest sites on the escarpment, where the day started slowly. They had fledged chicks that were whinging for food, but the cliff was misted in. And eventually the mist lifted and the adult birds went into hunt mode, and they just caught small bird after small bird after small bird. Every time they shot off the cliff, they came back with a small bird, to the point that one of the chicks was busy eating something and being plied with something else by one of the adults at the same time. So they can be incredibly efficient hunters, but that doesn't happen all the time, and we don't quite know what conditions have to prevail in order for them to perform that way. But certainly, if I was a little bird living in Taita Falcon territory, I'd be quite nervous. They are extremely fast. And as I say, when they put their mind to it and conditions are right, extremely efficient.
And if you're a little red-billed quelea in that area, I'd be even more scared. Because I just want to let you know that, like, if you are at the tunnel and the birds are there and you see a flock of quelea flying past the tunnel, don't look at the cliff for the taita, etc. Just watch that flock of quelea, because I think it's almost like chocolate for them. When they see those little flocks fly by, they just can't resist it. They're going to try and catch one of those little birds. So.
And it's a very dramatic, amazing spectacle to see.
Yes.
I mean, they are incredibly fast birds.
Yes.
So, yeah, don't try to follow them. It's a mistake. Just follow the queleas. They're much easier to follow.
Yeah. Absolutely. I remember one of your previous talks that you guys gave was called Chasing Shadows, and I think it's such an apt title for this bird. They really are so quick when they're on the wing, and trying to keep your binoculars or your scope or your camera on them is damn near impossible. But really, really incredible to watch the aerial acrobatics and just see them cutting through the sky onto some unsuspecting prey below. We've got one more question to go, and then I think we're going to wrap it up for the night. This one's from Al Nickel, and he's on Facebook asking if we know what sort of carrying capacity the Blyde River Canyon system has. I know you guys have been monitoring about 11 territories over the last couple of years. Do you think that is sort of the carrying capacity for the canyon? Are we looking at a much lower carrying capacity as we're seeing in more present day monitoring, or do you have any thoughts on the potential carrying capacity of Blyde River Canyon as a system in the greater escarpment?
I'm going to start off and then leave the rest to Andrew. Okay. And that is that we know that we're missing some pairs in the canyon.
Or in the area.
Yes, in that area. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, like we know, well, I mean, we feel that there should be some birds at specific spots, etc. And we go and we try, and some of them are very difficult spots to watch, etc. So, I mean, maybe there are birds there, or maybe there aren't, but we kind of feel that there's space for birds there. Maybe we're just missing them, and they are there. Yeah, but I'll leave the rest for you to say. Yeah, because that's very difficult to say.
We don't have them all in the area that we're working in. I think in the canyon itself we have 4 territories, 4 or 5 territories, maybe one right on the very edge. And of those, 2 or 3 are probably not really functional. Whether or not the habitat is at saturation, I mean, you saw in the results of the modeling that we did that presence of another pair of taitas is quite an important factor in determining where a breeding pair will be. So spacing out from one another, I think our spacing is about 6 kilometers or something. And when you get that kind of even spacing, which we seem to have, then that does suggest saturation, in the sense that if they need to be 6 kilometers apart, you know, that's what we have. We have a population that's spaced out more or less that way. But, you know, we could, Anthony mentioned there are places that we think they might be or should be, and if we find them there and suddenly that's 2 kilometers from the next neighboring pair, that could blow that whole theory out of the water.
I mean, my feeling as well on the modeling side, when you looked at that global, I mean, the large scale modeling that we did, I mean, that model predicts that we should see taitas across some of the other big cliffs in South Africa, up the eastern side of South Africa. And I mean, we don't have any record of there. So, I mean, it is an anomaly for me why there's just these small little pockets of these birds around. So if you had to ask me about the carrying capacity, yes, of the canyon, maybe it's foolish, but my feeling is that it should easily be able to expand all the way up the escarpment. I don't understand why we haven't found taitas further afield, etc. I mean, that doesn't answer anything. It just means that I'm confused. Yes.
We're doing a lot of head scratching.
Yeah. Yeah,
it certainly is a bird that causes a lot of head scratching. I agree with that. But
it's a blood from a stone type situation. But fortunately, we're stupid enough to keep beating our heads against that stone. Hopefully, we'll find something.
Yeah, we're falcon brained.
Well, you certainly have laid down a challenge for our viewers to get out there. And just to remind everyone, on these surveys, the guys go and sit on these cliffs for an entire day, from sunup to sundown, watching and hoping to catch a glimpse of these birds flying past. So you're not going to just rock up somewhere, and if you're extremely lucky, you might get a bird quite quickly. But you certainly have to put in the hours if this is a bird that you want to see. And I really just want to thank Anthony and Andrew for coming on tonight and sharing all of your wonderful insights. I know there's still a lot we need to learn about this bird, but you have certainly learned a hell of a lot about it in your years monitoring them. So thank you so much for coming on to Conservation Conversations and sharing the wonderful story and your wonderful photographs of these amazing Taita falcons. And I hope that your role as BirdLife Species Guardians will continue for many years to come, and we will hopefully get some more answers to the many questions that were raised tonight. So thank you both for joining me. Just a reminder to everyone, next week I'm up in the hot seat. I'm going to be doing another raptor, talking about my favorite, the secretary birds, and BirdLife South Africa's conservation project that we've been running on them for the past 9 years. So please do tune in at 7 o'clock next week, Tuesday. We'll be on Zoom and Facebook Live again, and you can hear all about the secretary bird conservation project. Please also remember, as you exit, you'll be directed to a post-webinar survey. Please feel free to just fill that in and let us know how you enjoyed tonight's webinar, and let us know if you're going to be attending the virtual African Bird Fair. Don't forget to go and register. It's going to be a really exciting event and definitely a first for Africa. So a big thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. From me, keep your eyes on the skies, keep enjoying those birds, and I will see you all same time, same place next week, Tuesday. Take care, everybody, and good night to Andrew and Anthony.
Thanks a lot, Melissa. Thanks to everybody.
Thanks,
everyone. We really enjoyed it.
Yes.
Okay, bye.